The first two episodes of Ahsoka are here, so it's time to dive back into some good old Star Wars episode reviews. But first, I want to, of course, remind everyone that this series we'll be enjoying for the next 7 weeks wouldn't exist without the hard work of the writers and actors behind it, all of whom are on strike right now fighting for fair pay from the AMPTP, and streaming series are a big part of that fight. But let's get into these episodes titled Master and Apprentice and Toil and Trouble. I will do a deep dive, but for my first impressions I'll say that I liked them both. I wasn't blown away immediately, but I think that's because both episodes seem like they're all about getting the entire audience on the same page. Some fans like me have seen the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, but many fans have not, so we need to spend some time making sure those of us who have never seen any of the animated series understand all these characters and what they all have at stake. It is a necessity, and I think Filoni did a good job at filling people in with the must-know details without bogging down the rest of the narrative. We did learn some new things about Sabine and Ahsoka. I was a little wary of how that would play out, but I'm really happy with Sabine being a Padawan so far. I loved Baylan and Shin and the newer characters, figuring out their goals and the larger galactic stakes. There's a really good balance between the huge mythic story and the personal, emotional character side. I think this is all really solid setup, but I did feel myself getting the most hyped up at the end of episode 2 because that's where Ahsoka catches up with the Rebels epilogue, and I feel like the setup is over and next week we're really gonna kick things into high gear. So those are my overall impressions. Now let's dive into some specifics. I love how it all begins with a red crawl to set the stage and then a capital ship flying across the screen. There's just something about it that gets you into the Star Wars mood. The prologue with Baylan and Shin keeps that going. Everything is just a little bit cheesy and over the top, but in a way that I find purposeful and charming, like the exaggerated way Morgan rubs her wrists after she's freed. I like seeing the differences in fighting styles between Baylan and his apprentice. He seems very methodical, and she's a little more aggressive and free-flowing, and I just enjoyed the quick look at the New Republic. Captain Hale calls Baylan and Shin overconfident, but that's exactly how he is acting. I think that's the lesson the New Republic never quite learned. You can beat the evil Galactic Empire, but that doesn't mean it'll stay beaten. You have to stay diligent to make sure they don't return. Seeds of exactly that are throughout the first two episodes, and we know the New Republic will defeat the Imperial Remnant, but then they're gonna get complacent again and let the First Order rise. It's a frustrating cycle, but it's unfortunately one we see in the real world, so it's worth highlighting. Elsbeth says Ahsoka is looking for some map to Thrawn, and so we cut to our title character in some very cool looking ruins. Ahsoka looks great as well. Her Montrals are much improved over her first appearance in The Mandalorian Season 2. She solves a puzzle and finds a cool little Rubik's Sphere thing. Outside, she is met by several HK assassin droids, and that was a fun little fight. A little bit Looney Tunes, cutting out the floor from beneath them, but I enjoyed it. And there are little beats as Ahsoka duels that just felt very consistent to the animated version of her character. The droids self-destruct, blowing up the temple with, I guess, the nukes they keep in their chest, and Ahsoka narrowly escapes thanks to help from Huyang. He's a character with some history in the Clone Wars. I did a video on him if you're unfamiliar, but what you need to know, he tells you by claiming he was following Jedi Mission Protocol. He's an old Jedi droid, and he serves as a thematic reminder of the order to which Ahsoka used to belong. He still very clearly holds Jedi traditions and philosophies in high regard, and I think that will be important for Ahsoka's journey in the series, because the crawl called her a former Jedi. She herself has said she was no Jedi in Star Wars Rebels. I think her arc will be about accepting that she actually is a very good embodiment of Jedi ideals. She had very good reason to walk away from the Order, and I understand her not wanting to even call herself a Jedi, but to me those are all technicalities. She has the heart of a Jedi at her core, and I think she'll learn to reclaim that title for herself. But for now, she's called to Home 1 to learn about Morgan Elsbeth's escape, where we meet up with Hera Syndulla. I love how bright and colorful these scenes are. We're continuing off of Star Wars Rebels, which was a bright and colorful show, so this just feels right. In hindsight, I think that was something I struggled with in the Jedi episode of The Mandalorian because it was so muted, which was on purpose. Corvus was not a happy planet to be on, and as we learn more about Ahsoka's state of mind, I think it makes sense that our live-action introduction to the character would feel more drab. Ahsoka shows off the sphere she found, which is the map to Thrawn. There are a couple things about this scene that didn't quite land for me. First, after The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, the whole race to find a map to find a missing character is just well-worn territory. But Thrawn and Ezra's disappearance was set up 5 years ago, so it doesn't bug me that much. And I do like the added twist that the heroes and villains are trying to reach the same place for different reasons. The good guys want to save Ezra, and the bad guys want to save Thrawn. I was more surprised when Hera seemed convinced that Thrawn and Ezra were dead. I never got the sense Hera believed that in Rebels, but I know Filoni has the tough job of quickly setting up who Ezra is and the fact that he is at least important to our protagonists. And so we cut over to Ezra's homeworld, Lothal, where both he and Thrawn were last seen. Governor Ryder Azadi gives a speech about his sacrifice, and the character is still played by Clancy Brown, which is awesome. He has played several voice roles in Star Wars, as well as Berg in The Mandalorian, but I love getting to see him in the flesh here. He introduces Sabine Wren, but she's missing, and then we cut over to her first live-action appearance. It's very punk rock, and can I just say how much I'm loving the in-universe Star Wars music we've been getting lately? If you haven't listened to the tracks from Star Wars Jedi Survivor, check them out. I love that album, and I hope they release the track Sabine is listening to as well. I also love seeing E-Wings in live action. It's a small thing, but I loved that starfighter in Star Wars Legends, and it's great to see it here so prominently. Anyway, Sabine blows off an official ceremony to hide out at home, which is actually Ezra's old home, but now she lives there with a Lothcat, and while she tries to find some peace, her musical theme from Star Wars Rebels kicks in, and I love that music. I'm sure I'll be praising the score throughout this series, and I'm thrilled to have Kevin Kiner as the composer. Several moments with Sabine and Ahsoka's theme gave me chills in these episodes. Sabine pulls out a recording of Ezra to, again, keep filling in newcomers to this part of the story on who he is and why he is important to these people. I like the touch that he says this is a special recording for her outside of the one he made for the entire Ghost crew at the end of Rebels. Going back over to Shin, Baylan, and Elsbeth, we get confirmation that Morgan is in fact a Night Sister, which I pumped my fist at. I'm sure I'll do a video on them in more depth, but basically they wield the Force through magic, which is almost always powered by the dark side. They can learn to wield the Force in the more classical way of the Jedi or Sith as well, but the magic is recognizable through green flames. Convinced Ahsoka has the map, Morgan tells Shin to go to Lothal to find it, and I love that beat where she basically asks Baylan if she should follow those orders. I get the sense that they're working for her as long as it's convenient. They're mercenaries, and I'm sure they're enjoying the credits, but as they get closer to Thrawn, I can easily see them betraying her. Everything with the two of them, as well as Marok, who first appears here, I love it. Like I said, the new stuff I'm super into. Ahsoka also heads to Lothal to tell Sabine she needs help finding Ezra, and we catch up on a lot of their story that's new. As the trailers for the series suggested, Sabine is Ahsoka's Padawan, or was. This scene was great too, giving us insight back into The Mandalorian as well. We learned that Ahsoka calls her shuttle home, traveling around where she's needed, which is a very Jedi thing to do. She's like a nomadic helper, but I think what happened to Anakin has caused her to fear setting down roots or making attachments of any kind, which is understandable, but Sabine feels like Ahsoka went where she was needed by complete strangers and ignored her needs. Ahsoka used to be so close with Anakin and Obi-Wan and Plo Koon and others, but now she's put up walls. She wouldn't train Grogu because he was attached to Din. She wouldn't train Sabine, probably for similar reasons. But I think it all boils down to her fears of where attachment might lead for her. Creating relationships and being there for your friends is obviously not a bad thing, just don't become controlling and overly dependent on those relationships like Anakin did. I like the tension and anger and resentment felt between the two women, and it feels like a mirror to Anakin and Ahsoka. They didn't get along at first. Ahsoka made mistakes and defied orders. I like that she now has to deal with a similar apprentice herself. Fingers crossed she and Anakin's Force Ghost can bond over that later. Speaking of defying orders, Sabine takes the star map and heads back to her home where she can think more clearly. Ahsoka vents to Hera, and I very much felt like Mary Elizabeth Winstead was embodying the animated version of the character in this scene, giving Ahsoka advice and keeping the peace between her found family, still being the team mom. Ahsoka also mentions being the former Padawan of Anakin, which still might be news to some fans, so it's an important detail to include. Back at Sabine's, she solves the Rubik's Sphere and reveals the map to Thrawn, who is apparently in a completely different galaxy, which is wild. I just figured he was lost in the unknown regions or something, but I think this is an even bigger and more epic challenge for everyone to overcome. Molly pointed out to me that the symbol seen on the map device and in the temple on Arcana is the Celtic Trinity knot, which means something specific for Wiccans, and makes sense for the Night Sisters to be using it too. It represents the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone, which we could potentially relate back to Sabine, Hera, and Ahsoka. I think that's worth keeping an eye on as the series continues. But Shin and her droids steal the map back, prompting Sabine to pick up the lightsaber Ezra left her. I liked the duel, with Sabine feeling outclassed the entire time. I have to imagine they'll be adversaries the whole series, so seeing her come into her own will be fun. For now, though, I was shocked when Sabine was straight up impaled. I mean, obviously she wasn't gonna die, but I still think that was an effective moment. Fortunately, we didn't have to worry about any kind of cliffhanger, and we can just move into part 2, Toil and Trouble. Whew, Sabine survived, what a relief. She wakes up with Ahsoka in a hospital room recovering from her injury. Natasha does a great job at conveying her regret, and Rosario Dawson expresses just enough disappointment and annoyance through her calm demeanor when she learns their enemies have the map, who take it to some weird structure on the planet Cetos. But Ahsoka recovers the head from one of Shin's droids, and Sabine regains some trust by hacking into its memory core and learning it came from Corellia. This scene went on a little long for me, but it showed that Ahsoka does need Sabine for things she can't do on her own, and it shows Sabine's self-doubt, and it was nice to see Hera being the encouraging mother figure again. They had a great relationship in Rebels, so I think this was a good story beat for people who have never watched it. Meanwhile, on Cetos, Morgan uses her magic to reveal the star map in full, as well as the path to the other galaxy where Thrawn is banished, which is surrounded by Purrgil-looking artwork, so that makes sense. Baylan is doubtful, unsure of everything, but Morgan claims Thrawn is calling to her, and I'm scared. I do think that's where Thrawn is, but I wonder if something else is calling her. You can hear something or someone whisper her name, and it doesn't sound like Thrawn to me, but we'll have to wait and find out. I guess Baylan is willing to wait too, because he seems hopeful. Shin asks what will happen when Thrawn is found, and he says for some it will mean war, but then he gets a wistful look and says others will find a new beginning. I wonder if he's trying to get out of this galaxy and start his life over. But he also says he and Shin specifically will find power such as they never dreamed. The answer could be both. I kinda like the idea of them leaving the galaxy after tiring of its war and struggles. The same way Ahsoka has walked away from the Jedi and Anakin and Grogu and Sabine, Baylan might want to leave everything behind. I definitely see parallels between them. Both survivors of the Clone Wars, both claiming to no longer be Jedi, but Baylan absolutely does not have the heart of a Jedi like Ahsoka has maintained. Or they could be seeking some sort of new power. It might be much simpler. I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. He sends Shin to Corellia, where Ahsoka and Hera have also arrived. I love that the planet looks a lot better than it did under Imperial rule, as we saw in Solo. The same way Lothal looks a lot better after its liberation. There we meet Min Weaver, this dude, wearing his New Republic pin on his coat while he's secretly working for the Empire. Well, I should clarify, he says he's a businessman and his loyalties are to his investors. But what if your investors are Imperial, Weaver? What then? I'll leave the politics up to you, he says. Just another horrible executive type that prioritizes making money over morality and profits over people. And did I mention the writers and actors are currently on strike because they're tired of being underpaid, so Disney and Netflix and Amazon and their investors can all make more money? Hera pushes Ahsoka to take Sabine back on as her apprentice, pointing out that despite her mistakes, she has still helped them make progress in their mission. But it sounds like part of Ahsoka's hesitation is the self-doubt she senses in Sabine. Jumping back to her, Huyang examines her lightsaber that was once Ezra's, and I like that he points out the modifications she made. He also talks her through the excuses she is making, like not continuing her training as a Jedi on her own. If it was something she truly wanted to learn, she would press on even if her master walked away. Like Luke, who had to largely train himself in the absence of Obi-Wan and Yoda. But I really love Huyang confirming to Sabine and the audience that she has little to no aptitude in the Force. My biggest worry about Sabine being a Padawan was that she would have just all of a sudden become Force-sensitive off-screen, and we would have missed out on that journey. I'm actually very into the idea that we might see someone that the Jedi Order probably would have rejected as having no abilities learn to open herself to the Force and become a Jedi in spite of that. And the fact that it's a droid that has been with the Jedi Order for 25,000 years makes it even better. He's not shutting her down, he's telling her to stop wasting her time and get to work. Great scene. Back on Corellia, Weaver continues to be a weasel until a droid blows his cover and some Imperial loyalists open fire on Hera and Ahsoka. Morgan's droids steal a Super Star Destroyer hyperdrive and our heroes have to split up. Hera and Chopper chase after the ship in an exciting sequence that looks great, and seeing Chopper in action action so far works well for me. He is a goofy, surly character, but I loved seeing him banging on the ship, searching through junk, and literally throwing a tracking device onto the fleeing ship. Meanwhile, Ahsoka fights Marok, and he looks awesome. His Inquisitor armor looks great, better than his peers in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I love that it looks old, rusted, and worn. The fight is fast and a lot of fun, but Marok escapes, and I love Ahsoka's casual dodge of his thrown lightsaber. Very cool. On Lothal, a recovered Sabine takes out her Mandalorian armor and becomes herself once more, the version of her that we saw in the Star Wars Rebels epilogue. She's ready to stop drifting through life and seek out her destiny. By the way, I don't blame her for being directionless right now. Not only would she still be grappling with the loss of Ezra, but she probably feels some responsibility for the Great Purge of Mandalore. She and Bo-Katan started the Mandalorian uprising together, so Sabine has a lot to be sad about. It's also a nice touch that she cuts her hair in a similar manner as Kanan before he went to rescue Hera. Ahsoka receives a message from her Padawan in her full suit of armor, lightsaber on her hip, and she goes to pick her up. And there at the end of the episode, we have fully caught up with Star Wars Rebels and a very close recreation of that show's final scene. There are some differences, like the color of Ahsoka's cloak, but that's okay. I think that's just going to be part of her arc this series, going from Ahsoka the Grey to Ahsoka the White. Ahsoka the self-proclaimed not Jedi to Ahsoka the Jedi Reborn. But our villains are also finalizing preparations on what they call the Eye of Sion, a very big, very cool-looking ship or hyperdrive ring or device or something that will help them reach Thrawn's galaxy. Baylan feels that Ahsoka is on the way, and I love that he expresses some sadness that he might have to kill her. He's not a Jedi, he has abandoned their ways, but it's not like he hates them. He's a lot more complex than I expected. And that brings us to the end of the episodes, and I do want to point out the dedication to Ray Stevenson that was at the end of part 1. He really was a phenomenal actor, and he's one of my favorite things about this series so far. The rest of the credits are worth discussing too. I think there's probably a lot to dissect in there, but I plan on maybe doing that later and making a different video if I find anything fun. So yeah, my take on the first 2 episodes is that they're good. I enjoyed them, but I was far more interested in the new characters and situations. That said, now that I think everyone watching is mostly on the same page and we've seen everything Star Wars Rebels had to show us, I'm very excited to see what's coming. Everything that was set up is intriguing to me. The idea of visiting another galaxy is compelling. There's so much to look forward to. This all kind of reminds me of Andor, which I also felt started slow but deliberate, and once everything important was established, I started to love it more and more every week. I still have a lot of questions, even as someone who knows and loves Rebels, mostly surrounding Ahsoka and what she's been up to for the past few years. Where was she during the rebellion and all that? But questions like that have popped up throughout the Mandoverse shows. Since when do Mandalorians have to leave their helmets on? Why isn't Bo-Katan just taking the darksaber this time? Questions that always wind up getting answered, so I'll just be patient. I think the answers I want are on the way. I will be very curious to hear from fans who haven't seen Rebels. I think they did a good job at explaining what people need to know from that series, but I don't think I'm the best judge of that. I'm in too deep. I'm definitely glad I rewatched the entire series before Ahsoka. I think it put me in the right mindset, and the series felt like a good balance between what I've come to expect from both Star Wars animation and live action. Speaking of which, I think the overall look of the series so far is good. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series had some rougher moments with its over-reliance on the volume, which I do think was out of necessity in its production. Obviously, Ahsoka is using the volume too. There were moments I could very much notice it. There was some ship CG that didn't look great, but I found myself far less distracted by visuals than I did with Obi-Wan. So far, I am happy overall, and I'm optimistic I'm only going to enjoy future episodes more. But I've talked for long enough, so let me know what you thought of the Ahsoka premiere in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for all our continuing Ahsoka coverage, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page for video reactions and audio commentaries for every episode as they release. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.